Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I never thought I would walk out on Christmas dinner at my parents' house. But when I saw my 7-year-old daughter Emma and 5-year-old son Jake standing in front of the Christmas tree, staring at gifts with other children's names on them, while holding the drugstore coloring book and plastic car that were clearly afterthoughts, something inside me broke. Everything they had wished for, everything they had drawn pictures of and talked about for weeks after my dad's phone call, was sitting right there in front of my brother's kids instead. The whole thing started a week before Christmas. I remember the exact moment because I was grading papers at my kitchen table in our small apartment in Toledo when my phone rang. It was my dad, Jerry, which was unusual since he rarely called me directly. "Dallas, I wanted to ask Emma and Jake what they want for Christmas this year," he said in that gruff voice I'd grown up hearing. "Put them on the phone." I was honestly surprised. My kids had been talking about Christmas for weeks, but I never expected my parents to ask for their specific wishes. Usually, they just showed up with generic gifts from the discount store. Emma was doing her homework at the dining table, carefully writing out spelling words in her neat second-grade handwriting, while Jake was building an elaborate tower with his blocks on the living room carpet. "Emma, Grandpa wants to talk to you," I called out, and watched her face light up with excitement. She grabbed the phone with both hands, holding it carefully like it was made of glass. "Hi, Grandpa? Yes, I've been really good this year. I help Daddy with the dishes every night, and I got an A on my math test." She paused, listening, then her eyes went wide. "You really want to know what I want for Christmas? Really? Really?" I could hear my dad's voice rumbling through the phone, encouraging her to tell him everything. Emma launched into an animated description of the deluxe art set she'd seen at Target. The one with 64 colored pencils, watercolor paints, sketch pads, and even small canvases. She described it in perfect detail, down to the purple carrying case. "And Daddy, can Jake tell Grandpa too?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. Jake scrambled over, still clutching a wooden block, and took the phone with the serious expression he always wore when talking to adults. "Hi, Grandpa Jerry. I want the dinosaur excavation kit. It has real tools, and you can dig up a T-Rex skeleton and put it together. Danny at school has one, and it's so cool. It comes with a brush and everything." The conversation went on for nearly 20 minutes. My dad asked follow-up questions, had them describe exactly which brands they wanted, even asked them to spell out the names so he could write them down. I hadn't heard him sound so engaged with my children ever before. After they hung up, Emma immediately ran to her art supplies and started drawing pictures of the art set she wanted. She drew it from every angle, labeling each component in her careful handwriting. Jake found the Target catalog we'd gotten in the mail and circled the dinosaur kit with a red crayon, then drew arrows pointing to it with the word "please" written in big letters. "Daddy, Grandpa really wants to get us exactly what we want," Emma said, holding up her drawing. "He said he wrote everything down so he wouldn't forget." Over the next week, they talked about those gifts constantly. Emma practiced signing her name so she could write thank you notes for her art supplies. Jake watched YouTube videos of other kids using dinosaur excavation kits, studying the techniques. They even cleaned their rooms without being asked because they wanted to have perfect spaces ready for their new treasures. I was working as a high school history teacher at Toledo Central High, and honestly, money was tight. It had been 2 years since my divorce from Sarah, and between child support, rent, and everyday expenses, I couldn't afford the expensive gifts my kids wanted. But knowing my parents were planning to get them these special presents took a huge weight off my shoulders. My brother Ryan had always been the golden child in our family. He was 4 years older than me, a successful corporate lawyer at Henderson and Associates downtown, married to Ashley with 2 kids, Marcus and Sophia, who were 8 and 6. They lived in a beautiful house in the Sylvania suburbs with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. Meanwhile, I was struggling to make ends meet in a 2-bedroom apartment near the university. But this Christmas felt different. For once, it seemed like my kids were going to get the same treatment as Ryan's children. My dad had never made such an effort before, never asked such detailed questions or seemed so interested in making sure he got exactly the right things. The week flew by in a blur of excited anticipation. Emma and Jake counted down the days, crossing them off on the calendar we'd hung on the refrigerator. They wrapped the drawings and lists they'd made to give to my parents as a surprise, carefully taping the edges and adding ribbon bows. Christmas Eve, I helped them pick out their best outfits for the next day. Emma chose her red velvet dress with white tights, and Jake selected his button-down shirt with the reindeer tie his teacher had given him. They were so excited they could barely sleep, whispering to each other in their shared bedroom about what Christmas morning would be like. "Daddy, do you think Grandpa really remembered everything we told him?" Emma asked as I tucked her in. "I'm sure he did, sweetheart. He wrote it all down, remember?" That night, as I lay in my own bed, listening to the December wind rattling our apartment windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my family. Hope. Maybe things really were changing. Maybe my parents were finally ready to see Emma and Jake as more than just the afterthought grandchildren. Maybe this Christmas would be the beginning of a real relationship between my kids and their grandparents. I should have known better. Christmas morning started perfectly. Emma and Jake woke up at 6 a.m., just as the first winter light was creeping through our living room windows. They'd already opened the small gifts I'd managed to buy them, some books, new pajamas, and a board game we could play together. But their real excitement was reserved for what waited at Grandma and Grandpa's house. "Do you think they wrapped the art set in a big box or a small one?" Emma wondered aloud as she carefully braided her hair in front of the bathroom mirror. "I bet the dinosaur kit comes in a rectangle box because of all the tools," Jake added, struggling with the buttons on his good shirt. The drive to my parents' house in the Westgate neighborhood took 25 minutes through the quiet Christmas morning streets. Their two-story colonial sat on a corner lot, decorated with the same lights and lawn ornaments they'd put up for the past 15 years. My dad's green Buick and Ryan's black BMW were already in the driveway. "They're here! Uncle Ryan and Aunt Ashley are here!" Emma squealed, pressing her face to the car window. As we walked up the familiar front steps, I could smell my mother's cinnamon rolls through the door, that sweet yeasty scent that always meant Christmas morning in the Peterson house. Jake was practically vibrating with excitement, clutching the wrapped drawing he'd made for Grandpa Jerry. We rang the doorbell and heard footsteps approaching. My mother, Carol, opened the door, wearing her red Christmas sweater with the sequined snowflake. At 62, she still dyed her hair the same auburn shade she'd worn since I was a kid, and she always wore bright lipstick for special occasions. "Merry Christmas, you three," she said, giving us quick hugs. Come in. Everyone's in the living room." Emma and Jake practically flew down the hallway toward the living room, their excitement bubbling over. I followed more slowly, carrying the plate of cookies we'd baked the night before as our contribution. The living room looked exactly like it did every Christmas. The 9-foot Douglas fir dominated the corner by the bay window, decorated with the same ornaments my mother had collected over the decades. White lights twinkled between red and gold baubles, and garland draped the mantelpiece above the brick fireplace where stockings hung in a neat row. Ryan was sitting in my dad's recliner, looking perfectly comfortable in his expensive navy sweater and khakis. At 36, he'd inherited Dad's broad shoulders and confident bearing, but none of his rough edges. Ashley sat on the couch in an elegant cream-colored dress that probably cost more than I made in a week, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves. Their kids, Marcus and Sophia, were already on the carpet surrounded by opened presents. Marcus had his nose buried in some kind of advanced tablet, while Sophia was arranging tiny furniture in an elaborate dollhouse that must have cost hundreds of dollars. "Hey Dallas," Ryan said with a nod, barely looking up from his coffee. "Merry Christmas." "Uncle Dallas." Sophia jumped up and ran over to hug my legs. "Look what Santa brought me. It's a Victorian dollhouse with real electricity." My dad appeared from the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug. Jerry Peterson was 65 years old, a retired foreman from the Dana Corporation plant. With gray hair he kept military short and hands that were permanently stained from decades of working with machinery. He'd grown up during the tail end of the Korean War era, and he still carried himself like a soldier. "There's Dallas and the kids," he announced. "About time you got here." We've been waiting to finish opening presents. Emma and Jake looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in all the opened gifts and pristine wrapping paper. I noticed immediately that the area under the tree where unopened presents usually sat looked smaller than expected. "Where should we sit, Daddy?" Emma whispered. "Come on, you two," my mother called from the couch. There are still a few presents left under the tree. I watched my children's faces as they approached the tree. Emma's eyes were scanning the remaining wrapped boxes, looking for something large enough to contain an art set. Jake was doing the same, searching for a package that might hold dinosaur excavation tools. What they found instead made my stomach drop. There were exactly 2 small packages left under the tree, with their names on them. One was clearly a slim book or coloring pad, wrapped in generic Christmas paper. The other was obviously something small and plastic, probably grabbed from the impulse aisle at CVS. But sitting right there in plain view, already opened and being enjoyed by Marcus and Sophia, were the exact items my children had spent weeks dreaming about. Marcus had the deluxe art set spread out on the coffee table. The 64 colored pencils arranged in perfect rows, the watercolor paints gleaming in their plastic compartments, the small canvases stacked neatly beside the purple carrying case. He was using the fine-tip markers to draw what looked like a comic book character, completely absorbed in his work. Sophia had the dinosaur excavation kit. The box was open beside her, revealing the small tools, brushes, and instruction booklet. She was carefully scraping away plaster from what appeared to be a fossilized dinosaur bone, exactly the way Jake had watched other kids do on YouTube. My children stood frozen, staring at their dreams being lived out by their cousins. "Well, go ahead," my mother urged. "Open your presents." Emma's hands shook slightly as she picked up the slim package with her name. She unwrapped it carefully, the way she always did, trying not to tear the paper. Inside was a 24-page coloring book featuring generic princesses and a pack of 8 basic crayons. Jake opened his gift with less ceremony, tearing the paper to reveal a small plastic car, the kind that cost $3 at the drugstore checkout line. The room went quiet, except for the scratching sound of Marcus using Emma's dream art supplies and Sophia's gentle tapping as she worked with Jake's coveted excavation tools. "What do you say to Grandma and Grandpa?" I heard myself prompting automatically, though my voice sounded strange and distant. "Thank you," Emma whispered, clutching the coloring book to her chest. "Yeah, thanks," Jake added, turning the plastic car over in his small hands. I looked at my parents, waiting for some explanation, some acknowledgement of what had just happened. My mother was already bustling around, collecting wrapping paper and straightening cushions. My father was back in his chair, reading the newspaper, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Mom," I said quietly, moving closer to where she was folding discarded ribbon. "Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a minute?" "Of course, dear. I need to check on the turkey anyway." I followed her into the familiar kitchen with its yellow wallpaper and worn linoleum floors. The smell of roasting turkey filled the air, along with the lingering sweetness of cinnamon rolls. "Mom, about the kids' gifts," I started carefully. "Dad called last week and asked them specifically what they wanted. They told him about the art set and the dinosaur kit, the same things that Marcus and Sophia got." My mother looked genuinely confused, pausing in her task of basting the turkey. "What gifts?" "Your father never told me about any special requests from Emma and Jake. We just picked up something small for them since they're still young." The words hit me like a physical blow. "He never told you?" "But he spent 20 minutes on the phone with them, writing everything down." "I think you must be mistaken, Dallas. Jerry would have mentioned something that specific to me. You know how he is about Christmas shopping. He leaves it all up to me." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. Either my father had completely forgotten the conversation that had meant so much to my children, or he had never intended to follow through in the first place. "But Mom, they spent the whole week drawing pictures of what he asked them about. They were so excited because he seemed so interested." She shrugged, turning back to the turkey. "Well, children get excited about a lot of things. I'm sure they'll be happy with what they got. They should learn to be grateful." I walked back into the living room feeling numb. Emma was sitting on the floor, carefully coloring in her new book with one of the 8 crayons, trying to make the best of her disappointment. Jake was rolling his plastic car back and forth on the carpet, glancing occasionally at Sophia's excavation project. Ryan was telling my parents about his latest case, something involving corporate mergers and 6-figure settlements. They hung on his every word, asking questions and nodding approvingly. Ashley chimed in about their upcoming trip to Aspen for New Year's, and my mother exclaimed about how wonderful it sounded. Nobody was paying any attention to my children, who were quietly playing with their afterthought gifts, while their cousins enjoyed the presents they had specifically requested from their grandfather. That's when I realized this wasn't an accident or a miscommunication. This was exactly how it had always been in the Peterson family, and exactly how it would always be. I tried to focus on the rest of the morning, but watching my children pretend to be happy with their gifts while their cousins played with their actual Christmas wishes was like having a knife twisted in my chest. Emma kept glancing over at the art supplies, and I could see her mentally comparing the 8 basic crayons in her hand to the 64 professional colored pencils Marcus was using. Around 11 o'clock, Ashley surprised me by approaching while I was refilling my coffee in the kitchen. "Dallas, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, glancing around to make sure we were alone. Ashley had always been polite to me, but we'd never been particularly close. She was Ryan's wife first and foremost, and I was just the struggling younger brother-in-law who made things awkward at family gatherings by not being successful enough. "Sure," I said, leaning against the counter. She fidgeted with her pearl necklace, clearly uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something about the Christmas gifts. About why Emma and Jake didn't get what they asked for." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Ryan told your parents not to give your kids anything special this year." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for days. "He said he didn't want Marcus and Sophia to have to share the spotlight with their cousins. He wanted them to be the center of attention." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "He told them not to?" "He called your father 3 days ago. He said that since he was contributing more money to the family Christmas anyway, he should have a say in how gifts were distributed. He told your dad that your kids needed to learn they couldn't always get what they wanted, and that maybe, if you had your life together like a real man, you could afford to give them a proper Christmas yourself." The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the linoleum floor. The crash brought my mother hurrying in from the dining room. "What happened?" "Oh, Dallas, be careful of the pieces." "It's fine, Mom. Just an accident." I bent down to collect the larger pieces, my mind reeling. Ashley knelt down to help, lowering her voice. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I didn't want to cause problems in my marriage, but seeing those kids' faces this morning..." She shook her head. "It's not right." After my mother left to get the broom, I looked directly at Ashley. "So this was deliberate. Ryan specifically asked my parents to ignore what my kids wanted." "Yes. And your father agreed to it. He said Ryan was right, that your kids needed to learn some lessons about real life." I felt something cold and hard settling in my chest. This wasn't just neglect or forgetfulness. This was a calculated decision to disappoint my children in order to make Ryan's kids feel more special. I walked back into the living room, where Ryan was now helping Sophia with her excavation project, praising her technique, and encouraging her to try different tools. My father was sitting nearby, watching with obvious pride, and making comments about how smart and talented his granddaughter was. "Ryan," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "Can I talk to you outside for a minute?" He looked up from the excavation kit with mild annoyance. "Can't it wait? I'm helping Sophia with her dinosaur." "No, it can't wait." Something in my tone must have gotten through to him, because he stood up, brushing plastered dust off his hands. "Fine, but make it quick." We stepped out onto the front porch. The December air was sharp and cold, and our breath created small clouds as we faced each other. Ryan crossed his arms and gave me the impatient look I remembered from childhood, the one that said he was too important to waste time on whatever I had to say. "Ashley told me what you did," I said simply. For just a moment, his confident expression flickered. Then it hardened into something defensive and ugly. "What I did? What exactly did I do, Dallas?" "You told Dad not to get Emma and Jake the gifts they asked for. You specifically requested that my kids be excluded so yours could have all the attention. Ryan didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to the tone he probably used in courtrooms when he wanted to intimidate witnesses. You know what your problem is, Dallas? You expect everyone else to take care of your responsibilities. Dad and Mom aren't obligated to buy your kids expensive toys just because you can't afford them yourself. That's not what this is about, and you know it. Dad called them specifically to ask what they wanted. He made them believe they were important enough to have their wishes heard. Then you convinced him to break their hearts instead. Maybe your kids need to learn that they can't always get what they want. Maybe they need to understand that life isn't fair, and that some people work harder than others to earn nice things. His words hit exactly where he intended them to. Harder than others? I work 60 hours a week between teaching and tutoring. I've been busting my tail to give my kids a good life since Sarah and I divorced. And how's that working out for you? Ryan's smile was cruel. Still living in that apartment near campus? Still driving that 10-year-old Honda? Still shopping at thrift stores for their school clothes? Each word was designed to wound, and they found their mark. But it was his next comment that pushed me over the edge. Maybe if you had your life together like a real man, you could afford to give your kids a proper Christmas yourself. Instead, you show up here expecting handouts, and then get mad when you don't get them. Before I could respond, we heard the front door open. Emma and Jake appeared, looking concerned. "Daddy, are you okay?" Emma asked. "You look sad." Jake stepped up beside his sister, and in that moment, seeing my children's worried faces while Ryan stood there smirking, something inside me snapped. But it wasn't anger that broke me. It was the absolute clarity of what I needed to do. I knelt down to my children's eye level. "We're going home now," I said gently. "But Daddy, we haven't had Christmas dinner yet," Emma protested. "And Grandma made her special stuffing." "I know, sweetheart, but we need to go." Ryan watched this exchange with obvious satisfaction. Way to ruin Christmas for everyone, Dallas. Real mature. I stood up and looked at him one final time. "The only thing ruined here is what you did to 2 innocent children. But you're right about one thing. We are leaving." I led Emma and Jake back into the house, where the rest of the family was gathered around the dining room table, preparing for Christmas dinner. The table was set with my mother's good china, the turkey was golden brown and steaming, and everything looked perfect for a Norman Rockwell Christmas. "We're leaving," I announced to the room. My mother looked up in shock. "Leaving? But we're about to eat dinner. I've been cooking all morning." "I'm sorry, Mom, but we need to go." My father frowned from his place at the head of the table. "What's gotten into you, Dallas? Sit down and stop making a scene." "Come on, Emma and Jake. Get your coats." "Dallas, don't be ridiculous," my mother protested. "The children are having fun with their cousins." I looked around the table one last time, my parents staring at me with confusion and annoyance. Ashley avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with her role in the situation. Marcus and Sophia playing with the gifts my children had dreamed about for a week. And Ryan, still standing in the doorway with that satisfied smirk on his face. "We're not welcome here," I said quietly. "And I won't have my children treated like second-class family members." "You're being dramatic," my father said, his voice growing stern. "Now sit down and act like an adult." "I am acting like an adult. I'm protecting my children." I helped Emma and Jake into their coats, gathered up the cookies we'd brought, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear my mother's voice rising in protest, and my father muttering about how I was embarrassing them in front of the neighbors who might see us leaving early. Ryan called after me one last time as I reached the front door. "Hope you're happy ruining everyone's Christmas, Dallas. This is exactly why nobody takes you seriously." I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, holding my children's hands as we made our way down the front steps toward my car. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" Jake asked, as I helped him into his car seat. "No, buddy. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make bad choices, and we have to protect ourselves from those choices." "Are we in trouble with Grandma and Grandpa?" Emma asked, buckling her seatbelt. "No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble. We just need to go home and have our own Christmas celebration." As I started the car, I could see faces in the windows of my parents' house, watching us drive away. I wondered how they would explain our departure to each other, what story they would tell themselves to justify what had happened. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what they thought. I only cared about the two precious children in my back seat, who deserved so much better than what they'd been given. The ride home was quiet, except for the soft sound of Christmas music playing on the radio. Emma and Jake seemed to understand that something significant had happened, even if they couldn't quite grasp all the details. They sat in their car seats, still clutching their small gifts, occasionally glancing out the windows at the other houses where families were probably sitting down to Christmas dinner. "Daddy," Emma said as we turned into our apartment complex, "why didn't Grandpa remember what we told him on the phone?" The question hit me harder than Ryan's cruel words had. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes the adults who are supposed to love and protect you make choices that have nothing to do with your worth as a person? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, honey. Sometimes they forget what's really important. But we drew pictures and everything, Jake added quietly. We remembered exactly what we told him. I know you did, buddy. You both did everything right. When we got inside our small apartment, I helped them out of their good clothes and into comfortable pajamas. The living room still held traces of our morning celebration. Wrapping paper in the corner, the new board game on the coffee table, the books I'd given them stacked neatly on the couch. "Are we going to have our own Christmas dinner?" Emma asked. I looked in our refrigerator, taking inventory of what we had available. There was leftover pizza from the night before, some sandwich fixings, and the ingredients for mac and cheese. Not exactly a traditional Christmas feast, but it would have to do. "How about we make it special?" I suggested. "We can have breakfast for dinner, pancakes and hot chocolate with marshmallows." Their faces brightened considerably at this suggestion. There was something wonderfully rebellious about having pancakes for Christmas dinner, something that felt like we were creating our own rules instead of following someone else's expectations. While I mixed the batter, Emma and Jake set the table with our regular dishes, but they added special touches: napkins folded into triangles, the good glasses we usually save for company, and a small candle in the center that made everything feel festive. "This is actually pretty awesome," Jake announced as he poured syrup over his pancakes in elaborate designs. "Marcus and Sophia never get to have pancakes for Christmas dinner. And we get to eat in our pajamas," Emma added, clearly pleased with this turn of events. Grandma never lets anyone eat in their pajamas. As we ate, I found myself really looking at my children, seeing them in a way I hadn't in months. Emma was chattering about her friend Madison's art project at school, describing it with the same enthusiasm she'd shown for the art supplies she'd wanted. Jake was building architectural structures with his pancake pieces, the same creative energy he'd displayed when talking about the dinosaur excavation kit. They were remarkable kids, I realized. Not because of what they owned or what gifts they received, but because of who they were. Emma's kindness, the way she always shared her snacks with classmates who forgot their lunch money. Jake's curiosity, how he asked questions about everything from why leaves changed color to how airplanes stayed in the sky. Somehow, in the midst of worrying about money and feeling inadequate compared to Ryan's success, I'd lost sight of what actually mattered. My children didn't need expensive toys to be happy. They needed to know they were valued, loved, and worth fighting for. After dinner, we curled up on the couch to watch A Charlie Brown Christmas. As Linus explained the true meaning of Christmas to Charlie Brown, I felt Emma lean against my shoulder. "Daddy, I'm glad we came home," she said softly. "This is better than Grandma's house." "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because here we're together, and nobody makes us feel sad about who we are." Out of the mouths of babes. Jake had fallen asleep, against my other side by the time the movie ended. I carried him to the bedroom he shared with Emma, tucked him under his covers, and kissed his forehead. Emma followed, climbing into her own bed and pulling her favorite stuffed elephant close. "Daddy, are we going to see Grandma and Grandpa again?" she asked as I turned off the light. "I don't know yet, honey. We'll see. If we do, will you make sure they don't make us feel bad again? I promise you that I will always protect you from people who make you feel bad about yourselves, even if those people are family." "Okay. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you." More than anything in the world. I went back to the living room and settled on the couch, finally allowing myself to process what had happened. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the evening, but I'd been ignoring it. Now I picked it up to see a string of missed calls and voicemails. 3 calls from my mother, 2 from my father, 1 from Ryan. I deleted them all without listening, but as I was putting the phone away, it rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize, though something about it seemed familiar. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Dallas? This is Ashley. I'm calling from my mother's phone because I didn't want Ryan to see the call on our bill. I was surprised to hear from her. What can I do for you, Ashley? I wanted to apologize again for what happened today. And I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about what Ryan did, and it's not the first time he's done something like this. What do you mean? He's always been competitive with you, but it's gotten worse lately. He told your parents not to invite you to Marcus's birthday party last month because he wanted it to be just about our family. He convinced them not to attend Emma's school play because he had a work dinner the same night and wanted them available in case his plans changed. This was news to me. I'd wondered why my parents hadn't come to Emma's performance, but they'd said they were busy. I hadn't realized Ryan was behind their absence. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because what I saw today was wrong. Watching Emma and Jake try so hard to be grateful for those little gifts while my kids played with the presents they'd specifically asked for. I can't be part of that anymore. She paused, and I could hear voices in the background. I have to go. Ryan doesn't know I'm calling. But Dallas, you should know that this goes deeper than just Christmas gifts. Ryan has been working on your parents for months, convincing them that you're irresponsible and that your kids are too needy. He's been positioning himself as the reliable son while painting you as the family burden. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in shock. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the December night. Snow was beginning to fall again, creating a peaceful blanket over the parking lot. Other apartments had lights in their windows, other families settling in after their own Christmas celebrations. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had been done to my children. This wasn't just about gifts or family favoritism. This was about a systematic campaign to make my kids feel less worthy, less loved, less important than their cousins. And I had almost let it continue. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down expecting another communication from my family. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize, but the name that appeared made my heart skip a beat. It was from my grandmother Helen, my father's mother, who lived at Sunset Manor Senior Care Facility. I hadn't heard from her in months, and she rarely used her phone because arthritis made texting difficult for her. The message was short but urgent. Dallas, I need to tell you something about your grandfather's will and why your father has been treating you this way. It's not what you think. Call me immediately. I stared at the text for a long moment, trying to understand what my 92-year-old grandmother could possibly know about the situation with my family. My grandfather had died 8 years ago, and his will had been settled long ago. What could that have to do with Christmas gifts and family dynamics? But something in the urgency of her message made me reach for my coat. Whatever she needed to tell me, it was important enough that she'd struggled to type out a text message with her arthritic fingers on Christmas night. And given everything that had happened today, I suspected that whatever she had to say was going to change everything I thought I knew about my family. I arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez from next door to stay with Emma and Jake. She was a retired teacher who often helped out when I needed a babysitter, and drove across town to Sunset Manor. The senior living facility was quiet on Christmas night, with most residents settled in their rooms after the day's festivities. Grandma Helen was waiting for me in the small sitting area near her room, still dressed in the navy blue dress she'd worn for the facility's Christmas dinner. At 92, she was still sharp as a tack, though her body had grown frail over the years. Her white hair was perfectly styled, and her blue eyes held the same intelligence that had made her a formidable force in our family for decades. Dallas, thank goodness you came, she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand with surprising strength. Sit down, dear. We have a lot to discuss. I settled into the chair beside her, noting how she kept glancing around as if she was worried about being overheard. Grandma, What's this about? Your text mentioned Grandpa's will? It's about more than that. It's about why your father has been treating you the way he has, and why your brother seems to think he deserves special treatment. She paused, studying my face. Tell me what happened today at Christmas. I related the whole story. The phone call from my father, the children's excitement, the disappointment of finding their gifts given to their cousins, Ashley's revelation about Ryan's manipulation, and our decision to leave. Helen listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each detail. When I finished, she shook her head sadly. I was afraid of something like this. That's why I've been documenting everything. Documenting what? She reached for her purse and pulled out a small tablet, something I was surprised to see her using with such confidence. I may be old, Dallas, but I'm not stupid. And I've been watching your father and brother very carefully for the past 2 years. She touched the screen with practiced ease and showed me a series of video files. What am I looking at? Recordings of phone conversations between your father and Ryan. I've been using this tablet to record them when they talk in the visiting room here. The acoustics carry better than they realize. She played the first recording, and I heard Ryan's voice clearly through the small speaker. Dad, you need to understand that Dallas is never going to amount to anything. He's 32 years old, divorced, living in an apartment, teaching high school. Meanwhile, I'm building a real career and giving you grandchildren you can be proud of. My father's response was equally clear. I know, son. It's just hard sometimes. He's still my boy. He's not a boy anymore, Dad. He's a grown man who can't get his life together. And frankly, I'm tired of watching you and Mom waste time and money on his family when my kids could benefit from that attention and investment. The recording went on, with Ryan systematically undermining my character and my children's worthiness of their grandparents' love and support. There are 12 more recordings like this, Helen said, stopping the playback. Some going back 18 months. I felt sick to my stomach. How long has this been going on? Since before your divorce was finalized. Ryan convinced your father that your marriage ended because you weren't man enough to keep a wife, and that your financial struggles were evidence of your general incompetence. She switched to another recording, this one more recent. The thing is, Dad, if you keep enabling Dallas by treating his kids like they're as important as mine, you're sending the wrong message. My children are the future of this family. They're the ones who are going to achieve something significant. Dallas's kids are just going to follow in his footsteps, mediocre, struggling, always looking for handouts. I had to stop her from playing anymore. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Because I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening, and because I needed to confirm something I suspected about your grandfather's will. What about his will? That was settled years ago. Helen's eyes grew sharp and focused. That's what your father told everyone, but it wasn't the whole truth. She pulled out a folder from her purse, filled with official-looking documents. Your grandfather left a substantial trust fund specifically for you and your future children, completely separate from what went to your father and what will eventually go to Ryan. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. A trust fund? For me? $400,000, to be exact. Plus accumulated interest over the past 8 years. It's probably worth close to $550,000 by now. The number was so large I couldn't quite grasp it. But why didn't I know about this? Because there were conditions attached to the inheritance. The trust could only be accessed if you proved yourself to be a devoted father, and your father was designated as the judge of your character. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. So Dad has been controlling whether I get access to money that was left specifically for me? Exactly. And Ryan figured this out about 2 years ago when he helped your father organize his legal documents. That's when his campaign against you really intensified. She showed me bank statements and trust documents that detailed the account's growth over the years. There were also copies of correspondence between my father and the trust administrators, including requests from my father to delay releasing the funds because he didn't believe I was ready for such responsibility. But here's what your father doesn't know, Helen continued, lowering her voice. I've been in regular contact with your grandfather's lawyer, and I've been providing him with evidence of your character as a father. Report cards from Emma and Jake's teachers. Photos of school events you've attended. Documentation of your involvement in their lives. She pulled out another folder, this one filled with letters and photographs I didn't recognize. I've also been documenting your father's behavior and Ryan's manipulation. The lawyer is very concerned about what he's been hearing. What do you mean? What your father and brother have been doing constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. Your father was supposed to make impartial judgments about your fitness as a parent, not allow himself to be influenced by Ryan's self-interested manipulation. I looked through the documents, seeing letter after letter from teachers praising my involvement in my children's education, photos Helen had somehow obtained of me at Emma's school plays and Jake's soccer games, even copies of thank you notes from parents whose children I'd helped with tutoring. How did you get all this? I have friends everywhere, dear. Retired teachers talk to each other. Church members share information. And I've been very deliberate about staying connected to your life, even when your father didn't think it was important. She opened another file on her tablet. But this is the evidence that changes everything. The screen showed a bank statement for an account in Ryan's name. The amounts were significant, regular deposits of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. What am I looking at? Your father has been stealing from your trust fund to pay for Ryan's lifestyle, law school loans, the down payment on their house, the European vacation they took last year. All of it came from money that was meant for you and your children. The betrayal was so complete, so systematic, that I felt dizzy. He's been stealing from us to give to Ryan, and Ryan has been encouraging it, telling your father that since you obviously didn't deserve the money, it should go to someone who could make good use of it. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the full scope of what I was learning. My father hadn't just been unfair to my children at Christmas. He'd been systematically stealing their inheritance, while allowing Ryan to convince him I was unworthy of my own grandfather's love. What can I do about this? Helen smiled, and for the first time that night, it wasn't a sad expression. Quite a lot, actually. I've been in touch with your grandfather's lawyer, and he's prepared to file for an emergency review of the trust administration. With the evidence I've gathered about your character and the proof of your father's misconduct, you should have access to your inheritance within 30 days. And the money that was stolen? Your father will have to pay back every penny with interest, or face criminal charges for embezzlement. I looked at this remarkable woman who had been quietly fighting for justice while I struggled through each day unaware of the larger forces working against me. Why did you do all this? Why didn't you just tell me what was happening? Because I needed solid proof before I made any accusations. And because I needed you to see for yourself what kind of people your father and brother really are. If I had just told you, you might have tried to make excuses for them or work things out. She was right. Even knowing what I knew now, part of me wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding, some way to repair the relationships. But after today, after what they did to Emma and Jake at Christmas, I couldn't wait any longer. Those children deserve better, and so do you. She handed me a business card. This is your grandfather's lawyer, Patricia Williams. She's expecting your call tomorrow morning. She'll walk you through the process of reclaiming what's rightfully yours. As I prepared to leave, Helen caught my hand one more time. Dallas, your grandfather would be so proud of the father you've become. Don't let anyone, especially your own family, make you believe otherwise. Driving home through the snowy streets, I thought about Emma and Jake sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their entire future had just changed. They would never again have to feel like second-class family members, or wonder why they weren't worthy of their relatives' love. But more than that, they would see their father stand up for what was right, fight for justice, and never again allow anyone to treat them as less than they deserved. The next morning was going to bring some very uncomfortable conversations for my father and brother. And for the first time in my adult life, I was looking forward to it. I called Patricia Williams first thing the next morning from my kitchen while Emma and Jake ate cereal and watched cartoons in the living room. She was exactly what I expected from someone who had been my grandfather's lawyer for over 30 years. Direct, thorough, and quietly outraged by what she'd learned from my grandmother. Mr. Peterson, I've been waiting for this call for 2 years, she said without preamble. Your grandmother has provided me with extensive documentation of your father's breach of fiduciary duty and what appears to be systematic embezzlement of trust funds. What exactly are my options here? We have several paths forward. The quickest is an emergency petition to have your father removed as trustee and have the funds released immediately. Given the evidence Mrs. Helen Peterson has provided, I'm confident we can have this resolved within 2 weeks. And the money that was taken? That's where things get interesting. Your father will need to repay approximately $180,000 that was improperly distributed to your brother over the past 2 years. If he can't do that immediately, we can place liens against his property and garnish his retirement accounts. The scope of the theft was even larger than I'd realized. What about Ryan? He had to know where that money was coming from. Oh, he definitely knew. I have copies of emails between your brother and father discussing the reallocation of family resources. In legal terms, he was an active participant in the embezzlement scheme. She explained the process in detail. We would file papers that morning requesting an emergency hearing. The trust administrator would be notified immediately and would freeze all access to the remaining funds until the matter was resolved. My father and Ryan would be served with legal papers, requiring them to appear before a judge within 10 days. I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly, Patricia said. Your father and brother are going to fight this. Probably claiming you're an unfit parent who doesn't deserve the inheritance. Let them try. My grandmother has documentation going back 2 years proving otherwise. Exactly. Mrs. Peterson has been remarkably thorough. I've never seen a more comprehensive character file in 40 years of practice. I spent the morning at Patricia's office, signing documents and reviewing evidence. She had prepared a case that was airtight, financial records showing the improper transfers, recordings of conversations, proving deliberate manipulation, and extensive documentation of my fitness as a parent. Your grandfather would have been furious about what's been done in his name, Patricia said as we finished the paperwork. He specifically wanted to ensure your children's future was secure, regardless of family politics. The papers were filed by noon, and by 2 o'clock, my father and Ryan had been served by a court officer. I knew this because my phone started ringing immediately and didn't stop for the next hour. I let every call go to voicemail. When I finally listened to the messages, the progression was revealing. My father's first voicemail was confused and indignant. Dallas, what is this legal nonsense? Call me immediately, so we can clear this up. Ryan's messages were more aggressive. You have no idea what you're doing, Dallas. This is going to destroy this family, and it's all going to be your fault. But it was my mother's final message that was the most telling. Dallas, please call us. Your father is very upset, and Ryan is talking about countersuing for harassment. Can't we work this out like a family? That evening, while Emma and Jake were at their weekly art class at the community center, I finally returned one call to my grandmother. How are you holding up, dear? Helen asked. Better than I expected. Patricia says we should have the emergency hearing by the end of next week. And how do you feel about all this? I thought about the question seriously. Relieved, actually. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm fighting for my kids, instead of just trying to survive each day. That's exactly what your grandfather hoped would happen. He wanted that money to give you the power to protect Emma and Jake, to make sure they had opportunities and security. 3 days later, Ashley called me from her mother's house again. Dallas, I need to tell you what's happening over here. Ryan is absolutely losing his mind about the lawsuit. He's been calling lawyers all day trying to find someone who will help him fight it. And none of them will take the case. Apparently, when you have recordings of someone planning to steal inheritance money, it's hard to find legal representation. She paused, and I could hear children playing in the background. He's also been yelling at your parents, blaming them for being stupid enough to get caught. He keeps saying that if they had just been more careful, none of this would have happened. What about you? How are you dealing with all this? I've filed for separation. I can't stay married to someone who would hurt children to steal money. And I found out this morning that he's been hiding debt from me. Apparently, he owes over $60,000 in credit card bills that he's been paying with money from your trust fund. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Patricia had warned me that my father and Ryan might try to approach me directly beforehand, attempting to negotiate or intimidate me into dropping the case. She was right. On Tuesday evening, they showed up at my apartment. I saw them through the window, my father looking older and more haggard than I'd ever seen him, Ryan in his expensive suit, but with an expression of barely controlled panic. I almost didn't answer the door, but I realized this conversation needed to happen. "Hello, Dad. Ryan. Dallas. We need to talk," my father said. His voice was strained, and he seemed to have aged years in just a few days. "I figured you might say that. Come in." I had arranged for Emma and Jake to spend the evening at their friend's house, anticipating that this confrontation might happen. We sat in my small living room, the same space where my children had been so excited about Christmas just a week before. The contrast between their innocent joy and the ugly family business we were about to discuss was jarring. "Son, I think there's been a misunderstanding about your grandfather's trust," my father began. "No misunderstanding, Dad. Just theft." Ryan jumped in immediately. "You're destroying this family over money, Dallas. Is that really who you want to be?" "I'm protecting my children's inheritance from people who have been stealing it for years." "Your children?" Ryan's voice rose. "What about my children? What about the education fund we've been building for Marcus and Sophia, with money that wasn't yours to take?" My father held up his hands. "Look, maybe we can work something out. Maybe there's a way to restructure things so everyone gets what they need. The only thing I need is for you to stop stealing from my kids and start treating them with the same respect you show Ryan's children." "We've always treated all our grandchildren the same," my father protested. I looked at him for a long moment, remembering Christmas morning, remembering years of being the afterthought son, remembering Emma's disappointment and Jake's confusion. "Dad, do you really believe that? Do you honestly think Emma and Jake have gotten the same treatment as Marcus and Sophia?" For the first time, my father's confidence wavered. "Well, I mean, Ryan's family has different needs." "Different needs? Or do they just matter more to you?" Ryan stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Dad, he's never going to be reasonable about this. We need to let the lawyers handle it." "The lawyers have already handled it," I said calmly. "And they've determined that you've committed embezzlement. Those are just allegations. Those are facts, supported by bank records and recordings." Ryan's face went pale. "Recordings? Grandma Helen has been more tech-savvy than you realized." They left shortly after that, my father looking defeated, and Ryan muttering threats about countersuits and family loyalty. I watched them drive away and felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my family. Complete clarity about what was right and what was wrong. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Thursday. Patricia had warned me that my father and Ryan would probably bring their own lawyer and try to portray me as vindictive and money-hungry. "Just remember," she said as we prepared, "we have evidence. They have excuses. Evidence wins in court." Thursday morning, I put on my best suit and drove to the courthouse with a sense of calm determination. Emma and Jake were at school, completely unaware that their future was being decided in a downtown courtroom. The hearing lasted 3 hours. My father's lawyer tried to argue that the trust distributions to Ryan had been legitimate loans that were being repaid. Patricia systematically destroyed that argument with bank records, showing no evidence of repayment plans or even acknowledgement of debt. Ryan's lawyer attempted to claim that I was an unfit parent who didn't deserve access to inheritance funds. Helen's documentation obliterated that argument. Teacher recommendations, school involvement records, and even testimony from other parents about my character. When the judge asked my father directly if he had allowed family favoritism to influence his decisions as trustee, his hesitation was answer enough. The ruling was swift and decisive. My father was removed as trustee immediately. The remaining trust funds, over $400,000, would be released to me within 5 business days. Jerry and Ryan Peterson were ordered to repay the misappropriated funds within 30 days or face criminal charges. As we left the courthouse, Patricia put her hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud of you today. You fought for your children's future, and you won." That afternoon, I picked up Emma and Jake from school and took them out for ice cream. They were excited about their day. Emma had won a reading contest, and Jake had been chosen to help the teacher with a science experiment. "You seem really happy today, Daddy," Emma observed as she worked on her chocolate sundae. "I am happy, sweetheart. Very happy." "Why?" I thought about how to explain it in terms they could understand. Because sometimes when people treat you unfairly, you have to stand up for yourself and for the people you love. And today, I did that for you and Jake. "Are we going to be okay?" Jake asked, the perceptive question that showed he understood more about our struggles than I'd realized. "Yes, buddy. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be great." That night, as I tucked them into bed, Emma asked one more question. "Daddy, are we still going to see Grandma and Grandpa?" "I don't know yet, honey. That depends on whether they can learn to treat you with the love and respect you deserve. And if they can't, then we'll build our own family with people who appreciate how wonderful you are." She nodded seriously, seeming to understand that some changes were coming but that they would ultimately be positive changes. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you. More than anything in the world." The money was transferred to my account the following Tuesday, and the reality of what it meant for our lives began to sink in. $437,000, plus the funds that my father and Ryan were required to repay. For the first time in years, I could think about the future without the constant anxiety of financial stress. But the most important victory had nothing to do with money. 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a phone call from my mother. Her voice was small and uncertain, completely different from the confident, dismissive tone she'd used when explaining why my children didn't deserve special gifts. "Dallas, I've been thinking about Christmas morning, and I realized we made some terrible mistakes." I listened without responding, letting her continue. "Your father told me about the phone call he made to Emma and Jake, about the presents they asked for. I didn't know he had promised them those specific things. And if you had known, I would have made sure they got exactly what they wanted. I would have driven to every store in Toledo if necessary." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her crying softly. "I keep thinking about their little faces when they saw their cousins playing with the toys they had dreamed about. I can't sleep at night knowing we did that to them." "Mom, this wasn't just about Christmas presents." I know it was about how we've been treating your family compared to Ryan's. And I know it was wrong." 2 weeks later, she called again. "Your father wants to know if he can see Emma and Jake. Not at our house, not with Ryan and his family around. Just the 4 of you, somewhere neutral, so he can apologize properly." I thought about it for several days before responding. "He can see them, but only if he understands that things are going to be different from now on. No more favoritism. No more treating my kids like they're less important than Ryan's. And no more manipulation or family politics around children. He understands." We both do. The meeting took place at Wildwood Preserve, a large park where Emma and Jake could play while we talked. My father looked like he had aged a decade in the past month. The confident, domineering man I had grown up fearing seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "Dallas, I owe you an apology," he said as we watched the children climb on the playground equipment. "I let Ryan convince me that his family deserved special treatment, and I allowed that to cloud my judgment about what was fair. It wasn't just unfair, Dad. It was cruel. Those kids spent a week dreaming about gifts you had no intention of giving them. You're right. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for Christmas. I'm sorry for years of treating Ryan's children as more important than yours. And I'm especially sorry for betraying your grandfather's trust." He paused, watching Emma help Jake reach the monkey bars. "Your grandfather specifically wanted that money to go to you because he saw something in you that I failed to recognize. He saw that you were going to be a devoted father, someone who would put his children's well-being above everything else. And you didn't see that? I saw someone who struggled financially and assumed that meant you were failing as a man. I was wrong." We talked for over an hour while the children played. He told me about the pressure he'd felt from Ryan, the way my brother had gradually convinced him that success was measured only in dollars and status symbols. Ryan has always been driven to win, even as a child. I thought that was admirable, but I didn't realize he was willing to hurt other people to get what he wanted. What's going to happen with Ryan? He's moved out of state. Ashley served him with divorce papers, and he's facing possible disbarment proceedings. He blames everyone but himself for what happened. Near the end of our conversation, my father asked the question I'd been expecting. Is there any chance we can rebuild our relationship? Not the way it was before, but something better? That depends on whether you can treat Emma and Jake the way they deserve to be treated. Not as consolation prizes or afterthoughts, but as your grandchildren who are worthy of your love and attention. I want to try. Your mother and I both want to try. 6 months later, we had a new normal. My parents saw Emma and Jake every other weekend, but always on our terms and with clear boundaries about respectful treatment. There were no more surprise gifts for Ryan's children while my kids watched. No more comparisons or subtle suggestions that my family was somehow less deserving of love and attention. More importantly, I had used part of the inheritance money to move us to a better neighborhood and enroll in a master's program in educational administration. The goal was to become a school principal, to have more influence on creating positive environments for children. Emma and Jake flourished in their new school, making friends quickly and excelling academically. Emma joined the art club and discovered she had real talent for painting. Jake became fascinated with astronomy and started attending the Science Museum's weekend programs. But the biggest change was in how they saw themselves. They walked with more confidence, spoke up more readily, and seemed to understand at a deep level that they were worthy of respect and kindness. 1 year after that terrible Christmas morning, we had our own celebration. Helen had moved into a senior apartment closer to our new house, and she joined us for Christmas dinner. We cooked together, played board games, and watched movies in our pajamas. "This is so much better than Grandma and Grandpa's house used to be," Emma said as we opened presents around our own tree. "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because here, everyone gets to be themselves, and nobody has to pretend to be grateful for being treated badly." Jake nodded seriously. "And nobody's gifts are more important than anyone else's gifts." Helen smiled from her chair by the window. "Your grandfather would be so proud of all of you. This is exactly what he hoped would happen. A family built on love and respect instead of competition and favoritism." Later that evening, after the children were in bed, and Helen had returned to her apartment, I sat in my living room reflecting on how much had changed. A year ago, I had been a struggling single father who allowed his family to treat his children as second-class citizens because I was afraid of conflict and desperate for any connection to my relatives. Now I understood something fundamental about love and family that I hadn't grasped before. Real love doesn't require you to accept disrespect. Real family doesn't ask you to diminish yourself or your children to make others feel superior. And real security comes from knowing you have the strength and resources to protect the people who matter most to you. The inheritance money had been life-changing, but the most valuable thing I'd gained was the knowledge that I was willing to fight for my children's dignity and worth, that I would never again allow anyone, regardless of their relationship to us, to make Emma and Jake feel like they were less deserving of love than anyone else. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But sometimes, standing up to that hurt and demanding better treatment is the most loving thing we can do, not just for ourselves, but for our children who are watching and learning about what they should accept from the world. Emma and Jake learned that year that their father would always protect them, that their worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions, and that they deserved to be treated with kindness and respect by everyone in their lives. And I learned that being a good father sometimes means walking away from family gatherings, filing lawsuits against relatives, and choosing your children's emotional well-being over keeping the peace. It was the best lesson any of us could have received. As I sit here now, 2 years later, watching Emma teach Jake how to paint watercolor landscapes while they chatter about their upcoming science fair projects, I'm grateful for that terrible Christmas morning that forced me to see the truth about my family dynamics. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually invitations to create something better. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace with family members and protecting the people you love most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. about how you've handled difficult family situations. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. And please share this with someone who might need to hear that they're worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope your own family relationships are built on the foundation of love and respect that every person deserves.